The case against birthright citizenship seems straightforward and persuasive. Is it really right for an 8-month pregnant Mexican woman to illegally cross the Rio Grande, give birth, and be allowed to stay in America because her newborn child is now a natural-born citizen? By the same token, is it just for a Chinese millionaire to have 100 children by surrogacy, arrange for them to be born in the U.S., then move them back to China where they are now U.S. citizens and can later vote in U.S. elections? That's crazy, right? And these are not hypothetical or imaginary horrors. They're going on. They've been going on for some time. Here's Trump's top aide, Stephen Miller, in a recent post. Congress has passed numerous laws criminalizing, prohibiting, forbidding, and barring the entry of unauthorized and inadmissible foreigners. To say that the same class of excluded foreigners, whose very presence here is a crime, when Congress mandated a physical wall to keep them out, have a legal right to birth American citizens, is the gravest and most preposterous of all constitutional abominations, end quote. Who would approve such absurd outcomes? Answer: the Supreme Court. They just had a hearing last week on this topic, and not only can they approve such outcomes, I think the chances are they will. I'm not alone. Polymarket, the betting site, says there's a 96% chance the court will strike down Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. Those are heavy odds, and that's where people are putting their money. They're usually right. Now, why the court, with its conservative majority, might produce such an outrageous verdict, that's the subject of my monologue. For many Americans, it's disheartening to think that the court, our court, a 6-3 Republican court, would permit an unfair and destructive practice of birthright citizenship to continue. We look to the Supreme Court for supreme justice, and here is an outcome that is manifestly unjust. It's also illogical, imprudent, and just plain stupid. No other country allows birthright citizenship. So why should we? The answer, very strange if you think about it, can be summarized in a statement that the famous Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes once made. He said to a litigant in a case before him, "This is a court of law, young man, not a court of justice." Holmes's point is that courts exist to adjudicate law, not to administer justice. Courts operate according to procedures, not according to results. We might hope that these procedures produce just outcomes, but if there's a conflict between the two, between law and justice, law wins out. Justice must wait for a higher adjudication, perhaps in some other forum, perhaps not until the next world. Now, the left, strangely enough, cares about results more than about procedures. The left is result-oriented, and this helps us to understand the 3 Democrat-nominated justices on the court, Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, and Ketanji Jackson. They don't really care about what the Constitution says, except in rare cases like this. Their so-called living Constitution is basically result-oriented jurisprudence. Choose the result that promotes the leftist agenda and then look for reasons and justifications afterward. In this respect, one could say that progressive judges are not judges at all. They are activists in robes, activists masquerading as judges. These leftist judges, loyal to their progressive cause, want birthright citizenship. They want it because it's one of the few mechanisms to turn illegals into legals. So birthright citizenship fits into the left's long-term strategy to convert illegal aliens into Democrats. On the right, we're often led to believe that our judges are constitutional loyalists. They don't make laws, they scrutinize laws and policies to make sure they are congruent with what the Constitution says and means. But this pious account conceals a tricky question. What does the Constitution say? What does it mean? When the text is not crystal clear, how do you figure out the meaning and also the application of its broad and sometimes cryptic phrases? Most people don't realize that on the right, our justices generally use three distinct approaches. This is not to say that the justices fall neatly into three camps, but it does mean that justices tend to emphasize one of the three interpretive frameworks. Number one, first, natural law. Natural law means you understand the Constitution in terms of the great principles of right and wrong, a moral framework. Where does this moral framework come from? Well, it comes from the principles of nature and nature's God. Specifically, it comes from the Declaration of Independence, which appeals to those principles. In this framework, the Declaration is a sort of interpretive key to understand the constitutional text. I place only one justice, Justice Clarence Thomas, in this natural law camp. Birthright citizenship cannot survive a natural law reading of the Constitution. Is it really right, morally right, to say that because you're born here, regardless of the circumstances, you are entitled to be a U.S. citizen? Well, maybe in the 19th century, that might have seemed like the big-hearted, generous way to think. The country, by the way, had giant tracts of undeveloped land, and so more people were welcome. Hardly anyone even thought in terms of legal and illegal. If you want to come, just pack up and show up. Now, in that context, who is going to consider birthright citizenship to be wrong or a burden on the existing citizenry? No one. But of course, we don't live in the 19th century. The situation now is totally different, and that big-hearted approach, such as it was, is inapplicable now. We now recognize that birthright citizenship is generally used as a scam. It's a way to get around immigration laws. It's a loophole that sly and bad people exploit, saying, in effect, you screwed yourself with your birthright standard, and now we're here, and you're stuck with us. Now, the second framework on the right for interpreting the Constitution, maybe the mainstream one, is original intent jurisprudence. Justices Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch are in this camp, maybe Brett Kavanaugh also. This means reading the Constitution in the light of the motives or intentions of the people who drafted the relevant provisions. The text, in other words, is illuminated by its context. Now, the original intent of the framers of the 14th Amendment seems pretty clear. Senator Howard of Michigan, who offered the relevant amendment regarding birthright citizenship, said unambiguously, "This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of persons." And there you go. It doesn't apply to foreigners. It doesn't apply to aliens. And Senator Howard even gives specific examples to clarify the point. In a broad sense, what was Congress doing here? It was granting citizenship to the slaves and the descendants of slaves born in this country. The Republican Congress wanted this in the Constitution just in case Southern states, the Democratic South, got the bright idea of trying to exclude former slaves or their descendants from the benefits and rights of U.S. citizenship. So how can a constitutional provision enacted for the purpose of legitimizing and enfranchising black slaves and their descendants be extended, distorted, twisted to apply now to foreigners and illegals? Congress did not intend that. Congress specifically rejected that interpretation. And yet, for many decades, foreigners and illegals who give birth in this country have, in fact, been able to get immediate citizenship via this birthright claim. How so? Well, the answer has to do with the third framework for interpreting the Constitution, and this is the textual or literalist one. The basic idea here is that the intentions of the framers are marginal, maybe even irrelevant. What matters is what they wrote down and made part of the Constitution. The text rules, and the underlying motives are secondary. Think of a poem. Let's say Robert Frost stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Now, does it matter what Frost's intentions were in writing the poem? No. The poem stands by itself. It can be read, it can be interpreted based on what's in the poem itself. Same with the Bible. Do we need to know the intentions or motives of the authors of each book? No. We only need to know what the biblical text actually says. The textualist position is most closely identified with the the late Justice Scalia. I think Amy Coney Barrett is largely in this camp, maybe also Chief Justice John Roberts, although Roberts is hard to read because he also considers things like the public image and credibility of the court. In some ways, Roberts is like a CEO who has a judicial philosophy but bends it on occasion to accommodate other interests, as when he sanctioned Obamacare with essentially no constitutional justification whatever. Now, the text of the 14th Amendment as applicable to birthright citizenship reads as follows, quote, "All persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside," end quote. Now, a cursory reading of this would seem to support birthright citizenship. Hey, if you're born here, you're a citizen. Isn't that what it says? Well, not exactly. There is that qualifying phrase, "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof." What does this mean? Justice Ketanji Jackson in the hearing offered a strange analogy.
I was thinking about this, and I think there are various sources that say this, that you obviously have permanent allegiance based on being born in whatever country you're from. That's what everybody recognizes. But you also have local allegiance when you are on the soil of this other sovereign. And I was thinking, I, a U.S. citizen, am visiting Japan. And what it means is that, if I steal someone's wallet in Japan, the Japanese authorities can arrest me and prosecute me. It's allegiance, meaning can they control you as a matter of law. I can also rely on them if my wallet is stolen to, under Japanese law, go and prosecute the person who has stolen it. So there's this relationship based on, even though I'm a temporary traveler, I'm just on vacation in Japan, I'm still locally owing allegiance.
Now, lots of people on social media shared this clip and said, look how stupid this woman is. This is what it means to have DEI on the court. But in this case, I have to disagree. I think Ketanji Jackson is being very clever. Here's what she's saying. If I go to another country, whether it's illegally or legally makes no difference. If I go there, I become subject to its jurisdiction while I'm there. I'm under that country's laws. So if I beat up another person or rob a car, I can be in prison, not under U.S. laws, but under that country's laws. The point is that regardless of how I got there, I do have certain legal responsibilities and I do get certain legal protections simply by virtue of being under that jurisdiction. So Ketanji Jackson is arguing that by the same logic, a foreigner or illegal who comes here falls under U.S. jurisdiction. They have to follow our laws here, and they can be accountable for breaking them. They also get certain protections under our laws. A policeman, for instance, can't just beat up an illegal because they didn't come here lawfully. The point is that a child born here, even to illegal or foreign parents, is indeed subject to U.S. jurisdiction and thus meets the constitutional requirement of getting birthright citizenship. So if we lose this case, I believe we'll lose it on exactly this point. Ketanji Jackson's argument, far from being dumb, is the consensus position until Trump came along to challenge it. This is why we have had birthright citizenship for a century and more. Most legal scholars and judges have agreed, and agree now, that everyone who is physically in the country is, at least for the period they're here, under the sovereign jurisdiction of U.S. laws. But, of course, there is a counter-argument. While foreigners and illegals must obey certain laws, criminal laws, for example, they don't have to do other things. Indeed, there are things that they are not permitted to do. They can't vote. They can't serve in the U.S. military. So the best you can say is that they are under U.S. jurisdiction in a limited, but not a total sense. And this limitation also applies to their children. A further point is that illegals cannot claim U.S. jurisdiction because they shouldn't be here in the first place. Imagine a Nevada casino that's offering free chips to citizens of Nevada who are under the jurisdiction of the state. Now, I'm not from Nevada, but I sneak into the casino. Can I claim my chips on the grounds that by breaking into the casino, I'm now under its jurisdiction simply by virtue of my physical presence? Of course not. My physical presence there is illegitimate, and the only recourse is to eject me, to get me out. No chips for me, and none for my children either, irrespective of where they were born. The Supreme Court can reject birthright citizenship simply by noting that foreigners and illegals are not fully under the jurisdiction of U.S. laws, as the clear language of the 14th Amendment demands. Or the court can affirm birthright citizenship by saying that the Constitution allows it, legal precedent over a long time allows it, and if we don't like it, we can amend the Constitution. Of course, since that's a practical impossibility, the court would be saying, in effect, we might not like the results, but this is what the law demands. Now, in that case, I can think of only one remedy. This remedy might seem somewhat extreme, but it happens to be required by the exigency of our situation. Consider this. If the Supreme Court rules that the 14th Amendment allows birthright citizenship, then there's no congressional fallback plan. I keep hearing pundits say the court isn't going our way, we got to pass a law. First of all, with Congress divided the way it is, good luck in passing a law. But even if you could pass a law, that wouldn't do any good either, because the Supreme Court will overturn that law as unconstitutional. Remember, all laws fall under the Constitution, which is the supreme law. All laws that violate the Constitution must be struck down. This law would, almost by definition, run afoul of the 14th Amendment, or at least the Supreme Court's latest interpretation of it. And so we are forced to my solution, somewhat extreme though it may be. We must work to retain the presidency and have clear congressional majorities in 2028, and then we proceed to stack the court. Do what the left has long proposed. Add 4 more justices. But this time, we pick justices the same way the Democrats do. We pick justices who vote our way every single time. We pick result-oriented justices. There are some on the left and even some on the right who will say, this is wrong, this is unjust, this is putting outcome over procedure. And yet, there's nothing illegal about us doing it. There's nothing in the Constitution that mandates 9 justices. So my reply to these critics is the same one that Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes gave more than a century ago. This is a court of law, young man. It's not a court of justice. And thanks to our new justices, the law now becomes what they say it is. And that's the way I see it. Guys, I'm trying to boost my YouTube subscriptions to 1 million subscribers. I'm really close, and you can help me to get there. How? Well, once you watch the show, wherever you watch it, by the way, go to YouTube, subscribe to my channel, and also post your thoughts and your questions in the comments. In fact, I'll be replying to some of these questions myself. So YouTube, here we come. Help me get there. Here's the thing about crypto. It's here to stay. That argument is over. But think about it. This is a market that never sleeps. It's moving at midnight. It's 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And while you're asleep, who's watching? Because here's what nobody tells you. Most crypto platforms give you a login, wish you luck, and call it a day. That's not investing. That's gambling with your retirement and hoping for the best. That's why I've partnered with Block Trust IRA. Block Trust IRA is crypto IRA built for Americans who refuse to be on the losing side of that equation. Their award-winning AI engine navigates the notoriously volatile crypto markets around the clock, automatically rebalancing your portfolio to protect your gains and limit your exposure when markets swing. No panic, no emotion, no missed sleep at 3 a.m. Your savings sit inside a $200 million institutional-grade insurance shield, managed intelligently and secured from day one. Their AI never sleeps. It's rebalancing your portfolio around the clock, managing risk, responding to volatility, protecting what you've built, automatically, intelligently, without panic. Voted Bitcoin Magazine #1 technology platform, and that doesn't surprise me one bit. Open your crypto IRA today, and Block Trust IRA will give you up to a $2,500 inflation shield bonus straight into your account. Go to DineshCrypto.com and sign up today. They can print dollars, but they cannot print crypto. That's DineshCrypto.com. Greg Bovino was the top commander for Border Patrol and ICE operations in El Centro, California. He was then appointed as commander of ICE operations in some of the big Democratic cities, including Chicago, Minneapolis. He has now, it seems, come to the end of his term at ICE. He is, I believe, retiring this month, or maybe already just retired. And he's here with me to talk about deportations, mass deportations, what's going on, or maybe what's not going on. Greg, welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. The American people, it seems in 2024, voted for two things: sealing the border, and happily that has been largely accomplished. But the other part of it is getting these unlawful immigrants out. I'm not even sure if I should call them immigrants. They're not really immigrants. They're illegals who have broken their way unlawfully into the country. And a whole bunch of them, 5 to 8 million, came under Biden. Can you tell us why it is the case that these people are not being sent home?
Dinesh, thanks for having me, and it's good to see you. Tens of millions of those illegal aliens are present here in the United States right now, and we need tens of millions removed from the country. When we have a large conventional force of illegal aliens that have infiltrated our country, we need that equal and opposite conventional removal of those same illegal aliens back. Now, one thing that's interesting here, Dinesh, is when they came into the country by the tens of millions over the past 30 to 40 years, oftentimes the American public was that they were shielded from that somewhat. That was sort of the dirty little secret down there on the border. What happens on the border? Let's keep it on the border. Well, the problem is, as we know, that what happens on the border doesn't stay on the border. So those terrible things happening on the border, while those tens of millions were headed north, and that's from all over the world, when they were headed north, one of the things now that confronts the American people is when we push them south, they then see exactly what that conventional deportation looks like, and apparently some don't have the stomach for that. It was ignored on the way north, and doesn't seem to want to be ignored on the way south. So, I think we've got a lot of illegal aliens to remove from this country, and we don't have a lot of time to do that.
Let's start by looking at how they got here. And I say that because it seems to me that there is a powerful force in this country that wants to prevent the deportation of these illegals. And that's the force that brought them here in the first place. Wouldn't it be accurate to say that these are not just people in the normal sense who broke in? Some of them might have. In other words, these are people who were to some degree invited in. Under the Biden administration, my wife is from Venezuela. The word on the street in Venezuela was, Biden wants you here. They're offering you a home. They're offering you a car. They're offering you monthly payments, free health care. So, in other words, you have people who might already have a reason to want to go for a better life, or maybe they're fleeing from some turmoil in their own country, but they get the idea that there is a kind of easy pathway for them to get through. Wouldn't it be accurate to say that there were nonprofit groups, media outlets, people in the Biden administration, many others on the left and then the Democratic Party who saw a political benefit to having these illegals here, a long-term gain for the Democratic Party, thus suggesting that there's a domestic political problem that goes beyond the aliens themselves?
Exactly. And you speak of that incentivization of those illegal aliens to come in. And it wasn't only under Biden, it started under Barack Hussein Obama a decade ago. And interestingly enough, Dinesh, the regular Border Patrol agents working the line, once Venezuela started to fail, those Border Patrol agents, the line agents that work that line every day, came up with a very good question, saying, "Well, what happens when Venezuela gets here? What are we going to do then?" And they were ignored almost with a smirk out of that Obama administration. Well, guess what? Those Border Patrol agents working the line were right. But what you're bringing into the conversation is the meat of the issue. It was incentivized strategically for a reason. That was strategic in nature, thought of long ago, a decade ago. If we can bring these individuals in, and we're talking the Democrats and the liberals, if we can bring these folks in, that will help our party or perhaps our way of thinking long term. They're going to turn into voters, especially if they're ever given amnesty or any other type of immigration relief here in the United States. That can only help those liberals and that Democratic Party. And they carried out that plan for over a decade, and that culminated under the Biden administration with tens of millions coming across. It was something that I've never experienced before. I thought the migrant caravans under Obama were bad. Nothing like what we saw under the Biden regime when tens of millions came in. We really don't know how many came in because 80% of our border, let me say that again, 80% of our border was wide open for 4 years.
And not only that, Greg, but it seems like there was a highly organized operation to get people to the border. In other words, if you're starting out in South America or even Central America, it's not that easy to show up at the Rio Grande, right? It's not so easy to find yourself at the border, ready to cross. Somebody's got to help you along the way. You need maps, you need directions, you need to navigate through perhaps Mexico, you need healthcare. And it seems like there was an elaborate network that was servicing these caravans and these trains of people who are coming by the thousands, if not tens of thousands, and bringing them to the border. And not only that, once they get to the border, kind of coaching them legally on what to say. Because to my understanding, the scam here is that these people were told, just say you're applying for asylum. And then they're going to have to let you in and give you a court date. And that court date is going to be, a year, maybe 18 months from now. In the meantime, you're going to be able to sort of disappear in America. You may or may not show up for that court date, but you're basically, you're inside the tent, so to speak. And it's going to be really hard to get you out at that point. I mean, isn't this the sort of giant loophole that was exploited ruthlessly by the left and the Democrats to get those millions of people here?
Exactly, to the tune of tens of millions. But even more importantly is our immigration agencies, the ones that are supposed to stop those individuals coming across the border. Those immigration agencies, whether it's U.S. Border Patrol or Office of Field Operations, the good folks that work there at the ports of entry, or even ICE and Homeland Security investigations to a much lesser extent, we actually completed the smuggling cycle. We actually completed the smuggling cycle instead of preventing that smuggling cycle, which is what we had done for almost a century, is prevent that smuggling cycle from taking place. We actually completed the smuggling cycle. So with what you're saying happened there in those foreign countries, whether that was Mexico, Central South America, or even some of the foreign countries globally, they were coached. There were individuals, there were traitorous American citizens on the ground with those individuals, coaching, aiding, and abetting that entire operation in many different locales and locations worldwide. So that coaching and that mentoring, that material aid to those individuals as they made their way towards our border. And then when they got to the border, actually having the Border Patrol or Office of Field Operations take them into custody, give them paperwork, and turn them over to an NGO, a non-government organization. And there were many of those funded by the U.S. government. And when you say ruthlessly, that was complete ruthlessness towards the American people, a very concerted effort, top to bottom. whether it started in that foreign country or whether it was right on the border, a very well organized effort to bring those individuals, those illegal aliens, and they were still illegal aliens when they showed up at the border. That's what everybody needs to know is, despite the fact they claimed asylum, which 99% of those asylum claims or more are absolutely false, they're still illegal aliens. They still crossed that border illegally, but they were well coached. And unfortunately, the U.S. government completed the smuggling cycle for the first time ever in U.S. history. We completed the smuggling cycle, and that's one. It's very scary. We knew it was happening, and obviously we were. It fell on deaf ears if we were to bring that up to the administration. Again, met with skepticism, often a sneer and a laugh, and the orders were throughput and decompression. Bring as many through, decompress your facilities. So that happened in just about every sector on the border, except the El Centro sector. We didn't allow it to happen there. We went renegade on them there in El Centro, but it happened nationwide. That's why you see so many asylum claims and illegal aliens in the interior right now. It was unbelievable, the amount coming through every day that we knew about. Those are the ones that we knew about. The ones that we didn't know about, well, we don't know, because again, the border was 80% wide open nationwide because you had Border Patrol agents completing that smuggling cycle. And I think that's what's most concerning. Those NGOs, those non-government organizations, whether it was something like the Catholic Charities or whatever, they were receiving them as many as we could give them. And of course, they were being subsidized by the U.S. government as well. Very lucrative, from what I understand, for those NGOs to then receive those illegal aliens from us once we had completed the smuggling cycle.
Now, Greg, Trump gets elected. He seems to understand the problem. In fact, it's a centerpiece of his campaign. And he has effectively stopped the wave, the invasion, so to speak. But as you say, there's a lot of them that are here. Now, a subset of those people might be terrorists, they might be criminals, they might have shady records. And I suppose it makes sense to start by getting the worst of the worst out. But it seems to me that one needs to get all the illegals out. Now, I suppose pragmatically someone could say, well, this guy came in 2003 and he's had kids here and the whole situation is complicated. But it seems, nevertheless, we've had a giant number of people who came just in the last 4 years under Biden. So leaving aside the guy who came in 2003, why is it the case now that we can't get not just the criminals, but the several million people who came recently to this country? Why can't we send them home? Who's stopping that?
Sure. Well, and again, it goes back to when they come into the country, no one has to see it. When they leave the country, it's a bit more visible and visceral to the American public. By and large, I think 90% of the American public wants those individuals removed via mass deportations. 5 to 10%, that very vocal minority, don't. They're I would call them the cannon fodder or the fringe left of those liberals and Democrats that wanted them here in the first place, sort of their foot troops. And they make one heck of a stir when we mass deport those individuals south. But with what you're saying, Dinesh, there are several million here amenable to immediate deportation. It's not hard. It's not a hard concept. It's not that complex of a concept. It's just, do we have enough guts in this nation to carry that out or not? And that's what this question is going to revolve around. Trump did a fantastic job in shutting the border down. As you said, it was overnight. Trump gets in office, that border shuts down. And then when we went into the interior, if you remember, our very first operation there in Bakersfield followed soon thereafter by Los Angeles. As soon as those interior ops hit, that shutdown border got even more shut down. It was dramatic. The least amount of border crossers ever, but it was because border security and immigration was taken in context as a whole, not separate parts, which is one of the things that we did in years past. You would hear politicians like George Bush, for instance, we have to shut the border down first before we go into the interior. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Nothing, no more greater of a fallacy could be shoved down the throats of the American taxpayer than that. It's part and parcel the same thing. Border and interior enforcement, it's the same thing. We shut the border down, we go after the interior, and it has positive effects on both fronts, both at the border and in the interior. So when we talk about removing these millions of illegal aliens, not that complex of a subject. We just have to have that willpower to do it. And remember, part of our strategy at Operation at Large and Midway Blitz and the various operations in the larger cities that you saw was self-deportations. Self-deportations are a key component of removing those millions. Dinesh, can I put handcuffs on 80 or 100 million illegal aliens? That's would be almost physically impossible to do over the next 3 years. But as we have individuals realize there's no safe haven anywhere in the United States, those self-deportations begin to rise. And as they reach a crescendo, which is what we were looking at, a crescendo of millions and millions and millions a year, yes, we can reach that number. Again, not a hard concept. If we completed the smuggling cycle for them to come in, then we'll have them complete their own deportation cycle on the way out. You meet a grassroots strategy, or you meet a grassroots problem with a grassroots strategy, and that's part of what we were looking at there in the U.S. Border Patrol Operation at Large and some of those interior enforcement missions.
If I look at the operations in the Democratic cities, particularly places like Minneapolis, and I try to identify, you mentioned it's maybe 10 or 15%, this kind of minority that wants to thwart this mass deportation operation. But that minority seems to be powerfully positioned. In other words, where are they? They're activists on the street who come out and make a scene, sometimes trying to provoke ICE officials into some sort of retaliation or maybe excessive response. Then you have these guys in the media who exploit what a friend of mine, God Saad, calls suicidal empathy. In other words, they find every horror story that they can amplify. Oh, look, here's this poor family, and look at them, they're in tears, and the family's being separated. So what they do, the idea here is to convince a third guy who's sitting in his living room having breakfast, oh, it's awful what these people are doing, these ICE people. And then you have DAs like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia who are like, ICE is the problem. I'm going to be arresting these ICE officials. I'm going to be prosecuting them. So as I see it, it's a combination of activists on the street, media leftists, plus Democratic officials, plus, and I don't want to forget this, Democratic judges. In other words, people who will throw a restraining order on an ICE operation and basically go, you can't do it over here. Now they realize that they might be overturned. This could be appealed, but that delays the process. It pushes it back. I think the idea on the left is just to throw a lot of block and tackle into the ICE operations to slow them down. The general idea being at some point, Trump's going to be out of office and maybe we'll return to business as usual. Is this an accurate description of what you're up against? Because you're describing like, I got a practical program to get this done. Are these the people who are standing in the way?
Yes. Short answer is yes. One thing about that set of individuals that you just mentioned is one of the things that I found is they're very committed to their cause. Now, if all Republicans were as committed in their cause as those Democrats, those liberals that include the media, their foot soldiers out on the street, those activist judges that legislate from the bench, Judge Ellis in Chicago being a prime example. If they were as committed, if we were as committed as they were, we wouldn't have a problem. Wouldn't have a problem at all. But they are very committed. And, Dinesh, look, those folks will say, this man's a woman, and you're going to call that man a woman. If not, we'll fire you. And they're going to tell you that, and they still tell you that. Have they changed? Have they backed off from that type of rhetoric? No, absolutely not. They're in it to win it, and we must be in it to win it. And one of the things that we saw there in those cities, and this is a very subtle nuance, I'm not sure if a lot of your viewers have seen, but a lot of those cities, we were taking it to those fringe left activists, the media, and even those judges on all fronts. I call that total spectrum immigration enforcement. It does include that as well. If you saw Los Angeles and then Chicago, Charlotte, New Orleans, we did take them on. One of the things that the media that we were ready for there in Los Angeles were lies. The media will just flat out lie. It's not just maybe a skewed report or a report that maybe has a liberal mindset to it. It's a flat out lie. Oftentimes the media will flat out lie, and then they're on to the next lie while you're trying to react to their first lie. And then they're on to the next, the next, the next, and the next. That's their modus operandi. So that, as you say, that individual sitting on their couch in the living room is like, well, wait a second, the narrative has been set. I guess I'm going to have to believe it because there's not a counter narrative out there. Until we got to Los Angeles. And that's where you started seeing some of our counter narratives. Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom, we hit them with some counter narratives. First time that's ever been done in immigration history. I think the FBI does a pretty good job at that. We took some lessons from the G-men there at the FBI. They do a good job at that. But those counter narratives, we had Trish McLaughlin, the public affairs officer up at DHS, was fantastic at preemptively getting out ahead of that narrative and then putting the correct narrative out there to begin with. That's why you saw Karen Bass absolutely beside herself. She didn't know whether she was going or coming, Dinesh. She didn't know if she was looking up or down because we were absolutely putting that correct narrative out there, especially when we won that Supreme Court case on roving vehicle stops and consensual encounters. We beat them top to bottom there. That was part of our strategy, but we dialed away from that in Minneapolis. There was a much softer approach, and we were never able to dig in and conduct those counter narratives that were so important to getting the word out. Look at Charlotte, especially look at New Orleans, Operation Catahoula Crunch. In New Orleans, we had one use of force incident in a month, one. And we removed vast amounts of illegal aliens from the New Orleans area, vast amounts. Most of them left themselves. Self-deportations, they just up and left. And, some fantastic counter narratives down there. We were out ahead of the media and those activist judges and anyone else there in New Orleans. That's why you never hear anything about New Orleans. Now, they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about New Orleans because that is how you run an operation. That was state and locals working with Border Patrol, us working with media, public affairs. That all came together very, very well there in New Orleans. New Orleans being a sanctuary city in itself. And look at what happened down there. We did not do that in Minneapolis. And when you're not as committed as those fringe left liberal socialist sheep, and I use that's about the as strong a language as I can get here on your show. If we're not as committed as them, then outcomes won't be what we want them to be. We have to be even more committed than they are. You've got some fantastic law enforcement out there, U.S. Border Patrol and ICE, the very best that I know of they can take that mission on and complete it, even in the face of a couple of protesters. A couple of rioters or anarchists. And it's not really that hard. It's just we have to be as committed in our cause as they are in theirs.
You're making the key point. I think that the strategy of enforcement here needs not just an on-the-ground enforcement strategy, a cop strategy, so to speak, but it needs a media strategy, a rapid response strategy, maybe a legal strategy, all working in a coordinated way, in a sense, doing what the left is doing, but on the other side. Can you say in Minneapolis, like, what was the key factor? Because Republicans are actually quite famous for losing their nerve politically. I mean, I don't know if this comes from consultants who go running and say, listen, the polls are, I don't know if it's coming just from the fact that Republicans by and large are temperamentally a little bit more go along, get along types and not quite as aggressive. I mean, even on the issue of lies, like you say, you've got reporters who don't mind stating the absolute opposite of the truth, and they'll do it with a completely straight face. And their only consideration is, am I going to be caught or busted? But the ethics of it don't even enter into the equation. What would you say was the kind of breaking point in Minneapolis where essentially our side lost its nerve?
Sure. Yeah, I think that, and that's one reason I put them into camps such as conservatives and liberals. I go conservative and liberal because there are often, unfortunately, neat-weed Republicans that often turn liberal, as you say, when they lose their nerve. And their Thom Tillis, prime example of that. He's Mr. Amnesty now. He's from my home state of North Carolina, and I can't believe they elected him. But folks like the Thom Tillises that are worried about polling, they lose their nerve, and they've always lost their nerve. So I would consider him a liberal. So we've got conservatives and liberals. Most of the Republicans that I've seen are fantastic conservatives, and they're in it. They're in it to win it. But it's just some of those weak-kneed moderates or leftists kind of ruin it for them. And I think that is what happened there in Minneapolis. Now, remember, the U.S. Border Patrol wasn't Minneapolis there from the beginning. We're sort of the expeditionary force, the U.S. Marine Corps of federal law enforcement. We bring a different set of skills and a different mindset to an operation. Unfortunately, we were not there in Minneapolis from the very beginning, so it was a little harder for us to begin those pre-narratives and what we had done in, say, Los Angeles, Chicago, Charlotte, Bakersfield, or New Orleans. And if you're not out ahead of that from the very beginning, Dinesh, it's very hard to make that ground up and at the same time conduct operations in a city like that. It can be done, but you can't go into it with a softer touch or a softer approach. And I think that's what the Thom Tillises and some of the Republicans wanted, was a bit of a, for some reason, a softer touch. And when you go into it with that, all that does is empower those individuals that we just talked about that are so committed to their cause. They'll take that as weakness and they'll strategize and use that weakness against you in a heartbeat. And that's what they did in Minneapolis. So, from the very beginning, the stage has to be set. Mass deportations, a strategy that's not only, as you say, cops on the ground, but that whole contextual environment, whether it's media, attitudes, whatever that is. And getting out ahead of that at the very beginning is gold. You do that at the beginning and you have a successful operation, which is what we did up until Minneapolis. And, we can take a lesson from that. We can take a lesson and take a look at some of these elected representatives that cut and run. I call that cutting and running. Never cut and run when the sovereignty or the very culture of your nation is at stake over a couple of anarchists that are easily taken care of. That in itself is traitorous and unacceptable.
Do you think, Greg, that the Renee Good incident was the turning point? I say this because I saw a massive effort on the part of the left and its allies in the media to make Renee Good into sort of white lesbian George Floyd. In other words, there was an effort here to make her into a martyr for the cause, turn her into a kind of secular saint. Now that failed. It didn't really work, but maybe it worked enough that it gave the Tom Tillises of the world the heebie-jeebies, and they decided to start, in your words, cutting and running.
Sure. And the thing is about Minneapolis and all these operations, our narrative was, look at the good work that's been done and look at the violence perpetrated against the U.S. Border Patrol for almost a year. That violence started back in Bakersfield under the Biden administration. We went to Bakersfield under those last 2 weeks of the Biden administration, and we started seeing this violence. Not one Border Patrol agent hurt or killed in a year of perhaps the most violent domestic law enforcement operation since Prohibition, perhaps ever. I've never seen anything like it. And then the only two civilians that were killed were Minneapolis. It didn't happen in Los Angeles, Chicago, Charlotte, New Orleans, or the other locations. And that speaks to that great work done by U.S. Border Patrol and those ICE agents working the ground alongside U.S. Border Patrol. So rather than allowing the left to take the narrative like that in Minneapolis, the narrative should have been, starting in Minneapolis, is, wow, this is all that has really truly taken place. No law enforcement officers hurt or killed. And if you had told me that a year ago, I'd have said, no, there's something bad's going to happen with that level of violence. Look at really, it was a peaceful operation overall in terms of lethality and or violence perpetrated against us, given the amount of weapons and guns, gunshots, vehicle rammings, and that type of thing against federal law enforcement, not just 1 or 2 times, Dinesh, but 10 and 12 hours a day. You had ICE and U.S. Border Patrol pretty much in urban combat. I've got videos, I've watched videos. It looked like something out of a John Wick movie. When you go watch a movie, say John Wick or one of the action movies, sometimes it gets a little tiresome because you're thinking, well, this could never really happen. I'm kind of getting tired of the vehicle chases or the vehicles up on sidewalks or this craziness. I actually saw that a lot in those inner cities. Some of the craziest things you've ever seen. Cops disappeared, just us and a bunch of cartel violence and bad guys taking place every day, and no Border Patrol agents killed, no other civilians seriously hurt or killed in almost a year of operations. That's the narrative there. That's the narrative that Thom Tillis and the rest of those cut and runners need to be putting out. Why aren't they putting that out? Why weren't other officials in government putting that out? When you had the Pritzkers and the Newsoms and the Basses and the Johnsons, and then of course that crazy bunch out of Minnesota there, Waltz and the rest. Where were the elected representatives talking about the good work, that fantastic professionalism, ultra professionalism in the most difficult of environments by our federal law enforcement officers, those U.S. Border Patrol and ICE agents? They really missed an opportunity there. I don't know. Perhaps they were afraid to step into that fray, but that was the very time they should have stepped into the fray. You had a few of us talking and going up against the Newsoms and the Pritzkers, but perhaps some of the others there needed to step up and do their part.
Greg, what's next for you? Have you come to the view that you are more effective on the outside framing the issue and helping the American people understand what is at stake and building the political will for what needs to be done? Is that your reason for wanting to step out?
Sure. Idealism. Idealism is one of the most powerful tools that we have available to us. Are some of those fringe left socialist sheep idealists Yes, they're mistaken in their idealism, of course, but they are. We need that on our side as well. Um, Believe in your values, your upbringing, your political and national history, our founding fathers. So absolutely, if there's anything I can do to help this effort, whether it's immigration or Second Amendment, that type of thing, things that build a strong nation, absolutely, I'm going to be about doing that, putting the word out. I've got no problem putting that word out. I'll hold it straight and fast, and I won't apologize, because when you're right and you're doing a righteous and God-given mission, such as mass deportations, then we should be able to talk about that out in the open and bring that to America's dinner table. Let's bring this talk to America's dinner table instead of that guy on the couch listening to the lies by the Chicago Block Club. I call them the Chicago Liars Club. Instead of him listening to those lies, let's have him listen to the truth. So yes, absolutely. What's next for me? I am futures wide open. Whether that would be mass deportations sometime in the future, I can get back into that arena very quickly, but also putting the word out, that informational part of the strategy is so very important, and that is something that we've not done a great job on, us idealists, in the conservative movement, is to put that word out. I met some of the young Republicans, some of the young college Republicans there at CPAC. I've never been to a CPAC before, Dinesh, and didn't really know what to expect. My good friend Nick Sorter and Benny Johnson invited me last minute. I thought, oh, let me go. I brought away there were some key points brought back from CPAC, and that is those young people, those young college Republicans and conservatives are motivated. What a movement that is. They see it for what it is. They see the Thomtillises for what they are. They are ready to go. They're ready to dig in and fight. They got Trump elected. They did a great job in electing Trump. They're a very powerful force. So perhaps assisting them in what they're doing, that's something powerful. They're idealists. You want that idealism out there telling the truth. So what's next for me is we're going to give them hell on all fronts, and whatever I can do to help that, you absolutely damn well better believe I'm going to do that.
Greg Bovino, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinesh. Good to see you.
Big news coming out on silver right now. The U.S. just added silver to the critical minerals list. What does this mean? This is an important list of minerals that are considered crucial for U.S. security and economic viability. So, when you buy silver to help protect your savings, you're also buying a critical mineral that's needed for the U.S. and its economy to survive. That's why I want you to reach out to my partners over at Goldco. They're the #1 gold and silver company in the country. They have over 8,000 five-star reviews, and they have the best gold and silver offer in the business. So don't put this off. Don't ignore the facts. Get your free 2026 gold and silver kit from Goldco while you still can, and get up to 10% in bonus gold or silver while supplies last. Go to dineshgold.com. That's dineshgold.com. Okay, so about that Trump post on Easter. I won't try and parse the whole thing, except to note that Trump is a genius at setting off all the bad people. I mean, hey, I'm pretty good at this too, but I'm not in Trump's class. The problem is this post has also set off some of the good people, especially the phrase, "praise to Allah," on Easter. So what is Trump doing here? I'll answer this question with a quotation from the Bible. Quote, "And Elijah mocked the prophets of Baal, saying, 'Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened,'" end quote. That's what Trump is doing here. Hey, you mullahs, where is Allah when you need him? Trump isn't a secret Muslim, as some people suspected Obama was. Trump isn't praising Allah. He's mocking the false god in whose name the terrorists do their evil deeds. Hey, I'm now on Substack. It's kind of full circle for me. I started out as a journalist writing articles for National Review, The American Spectator, The Washington Post, lots of places. After my stint in the Reagan White House, I pivoted to writing books, and that was way back in 1991, so I've been mainly known as an author and, of course, later as a filmmaker. But my first job, journalist, and now I'm getting back to that. On Substack, you'll get original articles and commentary, groundbreaking investigations, exclusive access to film clips and show clips, and guess what? It's free, so check it out. Go to DineshD'Souza.substack.com.
Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon. Revelation 12:3.
Once again, an armed attack in the Middle East, but this time it's different.
October 7th was the devil's holiday.
It's very hard to believe what happened, even though I was there and seeing with my own eyes and seeing them laughing and killing and having fun with it.
Because if you don't open the door, they are going to kill you and they are going to kill me, so please open the door.
So who are the Jews? Who are the Palestinians? And whose land is it really? Could the fate of the world, of humanity itself, be somehow tied to this place?
The nation of Israel is a resurrected nation. So what if there was going to be a resurrection of another people, an enemy people of Israel? The Bible speaks about this whole war as a dragon representing the enemy attacking a woman representing Israel.
The civilian deaths on both sides represent victories on the part of the dragon.
Hamas did everything within their ability to maximize the civilian casualty.
We came back to a land that was largely barren and empty, and we brought it back to life, and we're going to keep it.
The devil hates the Jewish people because they represent the existence of God.
Because without that Jewish foundation, there is no Christianity.
If we're approaching the end of time, God will reveal himself more and more dramatically.
Speak back through the stones. The story that they've been telling is that Israel is a colonial project. The problem with that is the city of David. We are an inconvenient truth.
Are you aware of any significant archaeological finding that contradicts the Bible?
No.
God's word stands firm. The dragon will not prevail.
Your message here is become a dragon slayer.
Based on Jonathan Cahn's #1 international bestseller, The Dragon's Prophecy. This film contains graphic violence of October 7th.